Okay, hello there. So I'm going to explore and explain some diagrams I drew which lay out a stage theory of enlightenment. This video will explain some general trends of the stage theory, give caveats, and then get into the first stage, standard perception. So this map, which I'll lay out, makes sense of a lot of the spiritual landscape and helps position people who have a different take on the matter of mind. With these different stages laid out, different spiritual teachers can be understood in a greater context. Where they're coming from depends on where they've landed in these diagrams. Unlike other stage progression theories, such as spiral dynamics or the Keegan model or integral theory, which track people's development in terms of the depth of the complexity of their mental frameworks, or tracks a maturing factor which develops in people as they become wiser. These diagrams here are not about that and shouldn't be considered in the same vein. Although there will be overlaps between these theories, and I'm sure that progressing through these stages which I'll lay out will help in advancing people at the same time in the context of those other stage theories. However, just because someone has reached what I'm calling true no-self and centerlessness doesn't mean they are automatically stage 5 Keegan or vice versa. Being stage 5 Keegan doesn't mean you have a mind that is permanently centerless or boundaryless. It's conceivable that someone could have an incredibly liberated internal setup of mind, yet not be a very sophisticated thinker or mature in the way they conduct themselves. Also, unlike other maps of enlightenment, this map is not about making claims of changes in behavior or ethics, such as when someone is at a certain level of enlightenment, it's impossible for them to lie or feel fear or engage in sexual misconduct, etc. It's also not really about how one's worldview or metaphysical perspective is altered. I will talk a little of how at each stage what you're likely to hear coming out of someone's mouth and how they interpret their experience and reality differs. And although advancing through these stages will certainly have an effect on the person's behavior and their understanding of reality, nothing seems to be prescriptive or necessarily the case when it comes to beliefs. Many factors which aren't accounted for or related to in these maps, such as genetics, culture, other personal experiences, etc., do play a big role in determining how one acts and understands what reality is, even if they claim to have direct influence on the truth of things, independent of a cultural context. The edge between integrated concepts and immediate phenomenal experience bleed into each other more than we often recognize. Instead, these diagrams represent in a super bare bones, very restricted in a narrative sense, a simply much more intuitive, raw feeling quality of how a mind relates to itself, the world, and its sense of spatial identity, and how all these factors can change. Structure of mind seems to be one of the differences that makes the biggest difference when it comes to one's sense of serenity and freedom from suffering. These models I'm displaying are not about temporary experiences that one glimpses, but about what becomes someone's new default perception of certain mechanistic qualities of qualia and quite raw components involved in the representation of mind, world, and self. A few more caveats before getting into the specific phenomenology of each stage. So linear stage theories seem to never fit everyone's experience. So take this all with a pinch of salt. People can report being semi in one mode of viewing and semi in another. People report understanding a certain stage, but never having been through a previous stage. Of course, as with all stage theories, the propensity to lump yourself in a higher than realized stage is an easy pitfall and something to look out for to avoid self-deception. There's also the trap of trying to rush through the stages, and of course you don't want to waste more time than need be, but I reckon there's virtue in fully corroborating the hypothesis of mind setup of each stage in order to be able to really see through it. In fact, there will be a trend of first looking to confirm the truthfulness of a stage in the beginning and singing its praise until settling into a maturer point in that stage, and then realizing it's not complete, it's not fully doing it for you, and then looking to disconfirm it and break it down and move on. Also, many visceral descriptions sound like they could relate to multiple stages if someone doesn't have enough precise phenomenological skills. And to be frank on this matter, many people won't relate to these stages at all or begin to think of describing their spiritual journey in the terms that I use because it's just not how they think. Also, even if you have a certain level of realization, people's phenomenological abilities, their ability to use detailed, non-trivial, non-cliche words to describe their mind space varies considerably. And I suspect this difference not only comes down to personality traits and cognitive proclivities, but how someone practices. For example, I'm sure there are many highly realized Zen masters who are of the silent type and couldn't find the words even if they tried to describe their experience, because their Zen training doesn't integrate their linguistic faculties much with their insights, and so speaking is not well hooked up to their enlightenment. I would guess that different traditions produce better phenomenologists, which doesn't at all necessarily mean they are more effective, just more vocal. Really, vast empirical research needs to be conducted on how minds model themselves and change over time. This is just one model I'm putting forth, coming from personal experience and what I've observed in different spiritual awakening scenes. It should go without saying, but it must be said, that models are just models and are always a simplification of that which they are trying to depict. Also, note that of course these diagrams are not exhaustive and certainly don't cover all representation of mind structuring that can occur. For example, I didn't draw a diagram for out-of-body experiences where people feel estranged from their body and feel like they're hovering in the corner of the room. Okay, some general trends. As one progresses through the stages, we see two major trends, though could be framed as one. A process of the mind objectifying and de-objectifying more and more parts of itself, meaning more and more of perceived reality is understood to be a part of the mind and not a direct feature of mind-independent existence. More and more then becomes an object of the mind to model, to realize that it is not the subject of experience, hence an object, and is not really a thing which has independent substantial existence. The de-objectification process is where more and more percepts are de-reified and understood to be lacking inherent existence or actuality and are in fact empty constructions of mind. And this process eventually extends to everything, including the sense of time and space and consciousness and the sense that there is a mind at all. Eventually we realize there isn't a mind, or at least not in the way it was previously conceived of. However, until the ineffable, I must speak of minds. And so, enlightenment could be put this way. The degree to which you perceive yourself as being in touch with some objective mind-independent part of reality is the degree to which you are not enlightened. My guess is that the order of progress in these stages will track with the hierarchy of generative models. As attention learns to sift down into subtler and subtler models of apprehension in the mind, representation that require less components in order to persist, such as 2D space, are the last to be disabused of, whereas more complex representations of mind, such as high-level abstract languaging thoughts and beliefs, are more easily let go of because they require more attentional support to persist. So comparatively little diversion of attention makes them drop out sooner. Like other stage theories, we do see a transcend and include process, so the higher stages can understand the earlier stages. For example, someone in the big mind stage, as long as they are still functional, can continue to relate to the standard perception perspective and indeed act from there. Okay, with all that out the way, let's get into the first stage, standard perception. So this is how most people experience life. They feel like they are some little homunculus often in their head, although it doesn't have to be in the head. Some people feel more like they are in their chest. There is a sense that when they have their eyes open, they are looking at a mind-independent objective reality that is shared by everyone. In contrast, when they close their eyes, they feel like now they are in their mind, and it can feel like a little dark room. Their emotions and thoughts are in their mind, but that's about it. Of course, most people identify with their thoughts and emotions. They either are their thoughts or the thinker of their thoughts, and the same goes for their feelings. All your thoughts and emotions feel personal, that they are happening to you. And so whatever thoughts arise are considered to be your thoughts. You choose these thoughts, and so it must be what you really think. There isn't yet the ability to, or it's very hard to, just observe thoughts and not feel attached to their content. When emotions arise, the person feels fully caught by that emotion. Perhaps a mature person may have a less emotional reaction, or they can rationalize their emotions or learn to not be so reactive when in the heat of an emotional flare-up. However, for the most part, they just stew in their emotions. Whereas from the witness, stage 2 and onwards, even if emotions arise, there is a clear in-touchness with a part or parts of the mind that are not distorted by emotions. Later stages have an internal stability which those in standard perception don't have, and this relativistically provides them a sense of sanity. And so there's a lack of fundamental sobriety at this beginning stage. People can't really register the gap between thoughts at this stage. There are moments of no thoughts, but it's like the mind doesn't notice anything of interest in that space, and so there is a little mental lapse in awareness. The seconds of silence between thoughts, which do happen, don't get encoded into short-term memory, and so people's sense of their mind is that it's always full of thoughts. This will change in the next stage. Sometimes they may feel like they are their body, other times that they have a body. Really everything past the skin barrier is perceived as a separate other. There is a felt sense of having free will, that they are the freewheeling arbiter of their actions. Now, people may have differing intellectual beliefs about free will and what the self is, but despite those beliefs, it doesn't change much about how they intuitively feel / relate to their experience of self and being. For example, I know a neuroscientist who believes very well that everything she is aware of is really just a representation constructed by the brain, and that there is no seat of the soul which grants free will. However, she still viscerally feels like she has free will, and that she is an independent being located in the head. And this is a good moment to introduce an important distinction when it comes to how we talk about the self. We can either talk about the self in an ontological fashion, or we can talk about the self in a phenomenological fashion. The first kind is to draw upon ideas and concepts of selfhood that extend beyond direct experience. For instance, one may say that they are a brain, but experientially, they have no direct perception of being a brain. They can't see a brain, hear, feel, smell, or taste any brainness in their direct experience. It's just a thought, perhaps a valid thought, but is really attending to a very high level of abstraction that is quite distant from their direct perception. Now, to relate to the sense of self phenomenologically is to get more in touch with what one intuitively feels identical to in experience. Putting aside intellectual thinking, what, where, how in experience do you feel that you are? These diagrams are about the representation of people's sense of self in a phenomenological fashion. Often people conflate these two ways of talking about the self. And in fact, to begin to even pass this difference requires some mindful skill, and is really the beginning of investigating the mind as we do in meditation. The semantic content of mental images and mental languaging that appear are mostly confused as being accurately representative of the world in and of themselves at this stage. So with the default beginner's mind, closed individualism feels correct here, that you are a single, unique, personal being who was born at some point and continues to exist as inherently the same being throughout your whole life. Again, intellectual beliefs aside, this is how most people perceive themselves. And with that, okay, this wraps up the first stage in this first video in this series, and I'll see you again in the next video to discuss the next stage, the witness. So, thank you very much.